Examination of the book of Ecclesiastes. And in this final look at the last chapters, I have to say I've really wrestled with a lot of the conclusions and the proverbs and the sayings of wisdom in this story. I can see in my life, and I can see in our culture as Americans that many of the warnings that are given are often ignored, and that we find ourselves in difficult circumstances and in problems because we have rejected the wisdom that we see here in the Scriptures. And as I think about life, the essence of life, which is ultimately what we're talking about, Randy said a few times, and I think Jeff, I heard him say it during intercessory prayer, that ultimately it's all about Jesus. And I guess the skeptic part of me wants to ask the question, why? Why is it all about Jesus? Why is my life about Jesus? And the answer to that question is about redemption, because He has bought us at a great cost. He has given us away from slavery. He has given us away from an eternity separated from God. And it is not only has He given that opportunity, but He has taken away our ability to have to earn it or somehow sacrifice to save for it, or in some way, go through some terrible trial, but He has given it to us freely. And that we are free from all of the worries and the troubles of life, if we want to be. If we want to be, and of course that's the catch. That we are plagued by the troubles of life because we haven't truly accepted that truth. We may have accepted Christ, we may have made a decision for salvation, we may have picked a time in our life and said, I want to follow Jesus, but we're still in that journey of really following Him, of really accepting that we are children of the kingdom of God, and all the cares of this world, all the problems in this world that plague us, that can get us riled up. Nothing gets me riled up faster, I don't think, than listening to talk radio. I have to limit myself almost, because I'm ready to just come out swinging, and so I have to be careful with that. But we can get so caught up in the moment and so frustrated with the situation that we don't stick our head up above all of that and realize ultimately what's at stake, and ultimately the peace that has been offered to us through Christ's redemptive work. We're in chapter 17. We're going to pick it up at chapter 17. There is no chapter 17, so if you were turning there, hopefully you realize that. Chapter 7, verse 15. And we're going to close this chapter out by looking at extremes. In my futile life, I have seen everything. There is a righteous man who perishes in spite of his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who lives long in spite of his evil. Don't be excessively righteous, and don't be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Don't be excessively wicked, and don't be foolish. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you grasp the one, and do not let the other slip from your hand. For the one who fears God will end up with both of them. Now, I want you to kind of underline or make a mental note of that. The one who fears God, we actually see those words in the last chapter, in chapter 12, which we're going to kind of have to skip through a lot of material here to get to that point, but hopefully I will help us arrive at that place in the not too distant future. Because there is a great summation of knowledge that is found in that statement. And it says in verse 19, wisdom makes the wise man stronger than 10 rulers of a city. And then he says, there is certainly no righteous man on the earth who does good and never sins. And so we have a great verse that kind of matches up with Romans, where it says that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, where we have kind of that Old and New Testament harmonization. I love it when it's so clear and we don't have to dig for it a lot like that. And so he illuminates the problem. If we hadn't picked up on it in the first 6 chapters, ultimately the problem is sin, the problem is death, brokenness. Remember, God created everything good, and because He allowed us choice, then we corrupted it, and we messed it all up and made a big disaster. And now there is no righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. And hence why we need Jesus. Hence why we need a Redeemer, someone to save us, someone to deliver us from those difficulties. Now I want to fast forward to chapter 8, where we're going to pick it up, and where Solomon asks this question. He says, "Who is like the wise person, and who knows the interpretation of a matter? For a man's wisdom brightens his face, and the sternness of his face is changed. Keep the king's command because of your oath made before God. Do not be in a hurry. Leave his presence and don't persist in a bad cause, since he will do whatever he wants. For the king's word is authoritative, and who can say to him, 'What are you doing?' The one who keeps a command will not experience anything harmful, and a wise heart knows the right time and procedure. For every activity there is a right time and a procedure, and even though man's troubles are heavy on him, yet no one knows what will happen, because who can tell him what will happen? And no one has authority over the wind to restrain it. There is no authority over the day of death. There is no furlough in battle." A furlough is like a break. It's like a pause. "And wickedness will not allow those who practice it to escape. All this I have seen, applying my mind to all the work that has been done under the sun, at a time when no man has authority over another to his harm." So we have some teachings that I think go parallel with one another here. The latter dealing with submission to authority. I don't think probably anyone likes to talk about submitting to authority. And as I think about why, pride is one reason. We want to be the authority, so that's one obstacle, and so we don't like to, that causes us to have to submit to authority. I think another reason is we find fault in those who are in authority over us, and we feel like they are not as qualified as we are or as they ought to be in order to lead us, and so we struggle to submit to authority. But Solomon is saying that all of those things ultimately are futile. All of them are foolish, because we all have authorities over us. I tell this to my kids all the time, because I think at times they get tired of my wife and I being the authority over them. I get that because there were moments where I was tired of my parents having authority over me, or teachers, or I can name some bosses that I've had in the past, especially when I worked back in the restaurant, that I really did not like having an authority over me. And oftentimes in our attempt to justify our rebellion against those authorities, we forget that the point of the matter isn't to find justice, it isn't to have the ultimate boss or person over authority of us. Ultimately, it is for our own good, it is for our own protection that we submit to that authority. Because imagine, and we can see this probably in a lot of ways in the world, if no one's in charge, if there's no leaders, if there's no direction, ultimately we have anarchy. And honestly, there are some elements of anarchy that sound appealing to me. I won't lie, all right? But in anarchy, we have roving bands of thieves that are trying to steal and kill, and there is truly no freedom in that type of system, all right? Because everyone's always afraid for their lives. Everyone is always just trying to survive and get to their next meal, and so there has to be some kind of order, and that order can only come from people who have authority to bring that order. So whether we talk about it on the level of government, whether we talk about it on the level of our job or in our families, that authority is something that is very important to us because it creates that potentiality of freedom. And a lot of times I think we get that backwards. We feel like we're in jail when there are people who have authority over us. And I understand that. But it is for our own good. And so I find it is a pretty strong statement to say the one who keeps a command will not experience anything harmful. that's a pretty strong statement. I don't think he's saying that nothing bad is going to happen, because we've all served with poor leaders where we kind of went over the hill, went over the cliff with them, and it ended badly. And so I don't think that's what he's trying to say. But what he's trying to say is that we are found faithful and obedient as we submit appropriately to them. And I think we can see from a geopolitical perspective over the last century, we've had a lot of difficulties with submission to authority. You know, we went from a time during World War II and just after that in the 1950s where people had a high esteem for teachers and government leaders and for their parents. You know, we went from that time where people were generally polite and respectful. I mean, certainly not, I'm not saying that as 100% of the time, but as a general rule, to a time after the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement, which was not a bad thing, but what came from that is the spirit of rebellion, where we all want to live life our way, and we can think of even songs and movies that kind of led us to that path. And where that ended up is a civilization where there is no quote-unquote right or wrong. There is no respect for authority. There is no submission, and humility is no longer valued like pride is. I can't think of the number of times I've heard people in speeches, whether political speeches or in school, you know, saying, oh, you should have pride in your accomplishments. And I'm just sitting there thinking, man, that is so wrong. We should have humility in our accomplishments, not pride. And we shouldn't go brazenly out into the night with guns blazing to conquer the world, but rather we should go humbly and gently, seeking to be teachers of truth and those that bring goodness to the world. And so we have this it's almost like it's a perpetual opposite day. I don't know if when you were a kid, if you ever pretended it was opposite day, but I did that, and it was kind of fun, you know. But in the real world, opposite day is usually ends badly, or is ending very badly. And so we need to recapture this truth and understand that it is important for us to have humble hearts. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't times where we have to stand up for what's right, and we have to stand up for what is good and noble and true. But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about our pride, where we're standing up for ourselves and what we want, and so that our selfish desires and our selfish needs will be met. And he said that is something that is foolish and that it is harmful to us. All right, well, let's fast forward again to chapter 12. In addition to the teacher being a wise man, he constantly taught. Now, this section, I should probably preface, this is, as we look through all of Solomon's sayings, someone has come along, and I honestly do not know who. I've tried to figure that out. So if there are any scholars in here that have figured out who wrote this, but someone has come along and kind of written an ending here, a summary or a conclusion to Solomon's writings. And he refers to him as the teacher, of course, as we saw that even as early as chapter 1. And so he says that he constantly taught the people knowledge, and he weighed, explored, and arranged many proverbs. Now I want us to think about that for just a moment, because if ultimately our goal is to be wise, because Solomon was given the wisdom of God, he was given the wisdom of truth, if ultimately we are seeking after the same thing, at least I hope you are, and perhaps that's part of the problem, that we don't value wisdom. And again, don't hear me talking about knowledge, right? I'm not saying you need to know everything that happened in the year 1905, all right, which that certainly probably wouldn't be a bad thing. But wisdom is when we take that knowledge and we mix it in with experience, and what comes out of those two things of knowledge and experience is wisdom, all right? When we use that and we apply it to our life, and we use that as a way of life, as a way of living, then we ought to do these three things. We ought to weigh and explore and arrange these proverbs or these truths into our life. You know, part of the problem, I think, for us in the educational process, especially in the Western world, is that we are so we see education in such a one-sided way that we fail to truly gain wisdom in our lives, because often the way we see it is we have a teacher and they stand up and they kind of tell us all these facts. All right, this happened at this time if it's in history, or here's how you write in English. If you're in math, here's how you count, and here's how you solve these problems, and so on and so forth. And so then our goal is basically just to regurgitate back or to hear and commit to memory all of that information, in some form, whether it's a test or as we write a short story or whatever, an essay. And so for us, when we can do that, we say, oh, well, the educational process has occurred. And I want to challenge that notion, because I don't think that's the case. I think that the only time that the educational process actually occurs is when all of that knowledge that has been gained is then interwoven into our lives, into our choices, into the people that we are, into the way that we live our life. And then that mixture that occurs as it comes out in our actions and out of our mouths as we speak, then that wisdom that comes from that, at that point, then the educational process has occurred. And I think that we are stopping short of that full fruit of that. And that is one of the greatest teachings that we can glean from Solomon and from the book of wisdom, the book of Ecclesiastes, is that we are holding at arm's length ultimate truth that will have an impact on our life. I mean, how many times have you heard a child in school, whether it be elementary, whether it be high school, saying, when am I ever going to use this? Okay? Now, I will tell you a story. Actually, last week, I used Pythagorean's theorem in a real-life application. Now, this is shocking, but I was standing in our entryway of our new house that's under construction, and I was standing there with the guy who's going to do our drywall, and he's trying to estimate basically how much we're going to need, and because they'll bring it all out, and well, they have brought it all out, and they're finishing putting it up at this point. But at that time, he was new in the process, and he was just kind of figuring out how much we need. And so we have this area. When you first walk in, the roof kind of slants up to a higher level, and there's a balcony there where you can kind of look out over it. And it's a pretty long slope. I mean, it's a pretty tall section there. And of course, nobody just wants to grab a ladder and jump on it and go all the way up to the top. All right. And so he said, "Well, do you have any idea how long that is?" So I look at it and I'm thinking, why has he asked me that? I have no idea how long that is. It's not on the plans. The only, floor prints or footprints are on the plans, but the angles of ceilings and things aren't on there. So I got to thinking, well, this is like a right-sided triangle, and the two sides, if you square them, then they will equal the square root of the sum of those sides. Will be how many feet it is. And so I was sitting thinking, okay, a squared plus b squared. So I actually used that, shockingly enough, this past week or two. But honestly, many of the things that we learn like that, we don't put to use that much, because for one, we forget them, and for two, I don't think we learn them in a situation where we can really apply them. And now don't hear me knocking the classroom, okay? We're kind of in a classroom setting almost right now. Here I am, I'm speaking to you, you're sitting there, you're listening, hopefully, or at least a percentage of you are listening, others of you are kind of playing. Clash of Clans has a new sister game now, Clash Royale, and I have a feeling now when I started getting on to people for playing Clash of Clans, they're like, oh, well, he didn't say don't play Clash Royale. But, hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully that's just in my mind. But hopefully, as you're sitting there and we're participating in this process, it doesn't just end with you gaining some knowledge that you can pocket in here or store in your database. Because if it doesn't come out in some way, you wasted your time for sitting there, and I wasted my time for speaking to you. And in every process like that, whether it's a classroom setting, whether it's us watching some kind of documentary or whatever, that it has to be more than that. It has to go far beyond just the soaking up of facts and information. It has to be real somehow. It has to be, in the words of Solomon, weighed, explored, and arranged into our lives. And so I want to ask you right now, how much of the truths of the Bible, all right, of God's truths, the truths that Christ lived and died and then rose again upon, do you live out in your life personally? Not just talk about, all right, not go to Bible study and get in a circle and you're talking about it, but do you really live out Is it evident in your life? With the people that go to school with you or that work with you, if I were to interview them, would they say, man, this guy, this gal, they are different and they live these truths out? Let's go on. Verse 10. The teacher sought to find delightful sayings and write words of truth accurately. And the sayings of the wise are like goads, and those from masters of collections are like firmly embedded nails. Now, I don't know how many of you hammer nails on a regular basis, but a nail that is not firmly embedded will eventually work its way out. All right, so especially if you're nailing something into wood, which that's typically what we do, wood is not a constant substance, like concrete is, even though concrete actually it moves a little bit, but it's generally pretty solid. Wood will expand and contract based on how much moisture is in the air and how much moisture it takes in, depending on temperature. Usually if it's warmer, it's gonna expand, and if it's real cold, it's gonna contract. And that's why how many people have installed a hardwood floor or a deck or something? A few people. Okay, not as many as. All right, you guys need to get out there and do some projects. Okay, all right. No, that's okay. And so the reason that it's so important to leave an expansion gap is because of that, because the wood moves. If you've ever put in, I've done one, I will never do it again, one solid wood plank floor. I mean, that thing, once you put it down, it is going to move several inches over the next few years as the wood changes and as the moisture content changes. And that's why they always say once you buy your product, you need to let it sit out and air out, because that's so important. When you hammer that nail in there, as that wood moves, if it's not firmly in contact with whatever you're nailing it to, it's going to work its way out. I can remember one time we bought a rental house that was kind of a fixer-upper, and the deck had used nails instead of screws, which is fine, especially back, in the older days, that was a lot more common than it is now. And it's a lot cheaper than using screws. Man, screws are expensive, especially the exterior screws. And you could see as you walked out on the deck, just the heads of all the nails were just sticking out. It was crazy. Because over time, that wood had shrunk down and the nails had stayed in place, and so they had moved out. And so this is a great saying here when he talks about it being implanted, firmly, nailed in really good and tight, giving it that extra hit. It takes, I think ultimately the goal is to hit it in 3 hits. I can't do that. I mean, I've hammered a lot of nails in it. Usually I'm more like 4 or 5 or so. But ultimately the goal is to get that in there firm and solid. And he says the sayings are given by one shepherd, ultimately by God. But beyond these, my son, be warned. All right, so here is a warning. All right, and I think ultimately wisdom is a warning, because we know that life is full of trouble, is full of the temptation of sin. It is full of bad choices and problems. And so warnings are a pathway to wisdom. Warnings help us go, oh man. It's just like when you're driving down the road and people are flashing their lights and like the 10 people do it. It's either because you have a headlight out or, like you left your drink on top of your car. It's just either something like that, or it means that there's something ahead. They're warning you. They're saying there's a hazard ahead. They're saying the sheriff's car is right around the corner, and if you keep driving that fast, you're going to get a ticket. There's some kind of warning that is being given to you. And many of us, we just kind of, keep on going around. Like, well, don't tell me what to do. I'll do what I want to do. I'll drive how I want to drive. When we get this prideful thing, and I don't flash your lights at me. I'll drive with one headlight till the end of time if I want to. Kind of a thing. We get it all stuck in our ways. But it is the wise man, it is the wise woman who heeds those warnings, or at least considers it. Considers the warning that's given. All right, and so what is the warning? There is no end to the making of many books, and much study wearies the body. All right, in other words, it makes us tired. When all has been heard, in other words, when we have examined it all, and for us, I don't think there is any one of us, I know I certainly haven't, have examined it all right, that have committed our lives to like a monk or a nun in some way, where you're going to explore it all, to study it all. But I believe that Solomon ultimately had this opportunity. And so he says the conclusion of the matter is, fear God and keep his commandments, because this is for all humanity. All right, let's examine this here for a little bit. The first time that I ever heard the phrase fear God was in kind of an old-fashioned, it's probably in the early 1980s, old-fashioned hellfire and brimstone, repent or burn type of a sermon. All right, which probably we need a little more of those these days. But back then, we probably need a little bit less of those. And I thought that what it meant was that God is so big and mean and scary, and he's walking around and looking for me to mess up so that he can take his giant Thor hammer and just, strike me, and take me down. That's when I first heard that. That's what I understood that it meant to fear God. All right, but when we fear something, truly, fear is a matter of submission. It is a matter of respect. It is a matter of seeing that something is greater and more powerful. Something is more vast and deep than we can imagine. I can remember. I believe it. I'm trying to think which ship it was. We went to see. It wasn't the Missouri. We've seen the Missouri there in Pearl Harbor, but that wasn't it. I think there's a vessel on the East Coast. Is it the Queen Mary? Does anybody know if the Queen Mary is on the East Coast? West Coast. It's on the West Coast. Okay, that might have been. I think when we went to see the Queen Mary one time, I was young. I was 8 or 9, 10 years old. And I remember being in the very back, and you can actually look down into the water and see the propellers and stuff. And I mean, it was way down there. And it scared me to death. I mean, I looked down there, and I think people were like throwing coins down there or something. You can kind of watch them just... And there was a fear of that. Now, it wasn't that it was like this big, scary propellers, but it was just the vastness of the ocean, of the ship, how big it was, and what it would have taken engineering-wise and manufacturing-wise to make it. And there was just this awe that came over me. Right? It's kind of like standing out under the stars where you have no lights or nothing around, and it just seems so big and so vast. It's almost this awe, this feeling of just wow, I guess it's like when you're a little boy and you love comic books and you walk into the bookstore for the first time and you see like every comic book ever published in the walls, and you're just like, wow, kind of a thing. Whatever it is that puts you in that place of that awe, of that wow, that is an element of it, of what it is to fear. To recognize that this being, this thing that we're examining is so vast that we can't fully grasp it. No matter what we do, no matter how hard we try, it is beyond what we can comprehend. It is to understand that its knowledge and its greatness is greater than we can understand. And so when Solomon says to fear God and to keep his commandments, it is not that we are fearing God in the sense that he can take his Thor hammer and smite us, although I'm sure that he is powerful enough to do that. But ultimately, his goal is to redeem us. His goal is to see all the brokenness and all the problems and all the difficulties that were brought about by our rebellion are made right. And so we are to fear God and to keep his commandments so that we will be restored, so that we will be made whole. When you get hurt, when you get injured, you break your arm, the worst thing that's happened to me lately, I have this fiberglass splinter in my left. I would show you, but it probably wouldn't be appropriate, but it's in my left middle finger, and you can't see a fiberglass splinter. It's really obnoxious because they're clear. Anyway, so I haven't had any major injuries, but imagine the last time you had a significant injury. I mean, what's the first thing you're thinking of? Joey's thinking, I gotta get help, right? Is that what you're thinking, Joe? I need to get help. We're thinking, I need to go to the doctor, I need to call an ambulance, I need to get this fixed, right? I mean, that's kind of the natural thing that we think of when we're injured. And so when we are in this plight of life, which oftentimes it's hard to rise above the immediate problems to see this, but when we are in the midst of all of that, we need a doctor. We need a fix. We need to be made right. We need to have the difficulties and the problems fixed. And that is a natural thing for us. And God is saying, ultimately, in all of experience, in all the things that you do, in all the ways that you live and breathe, and all the actions under the sun, to use Solomon's own phrase, fear God, keep my commandments. Because that is the way, that is the pathway to experiencing a full and a fruitful life. It says, for God will bring every act to judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. Now the thought of that should terrify you. Okay, that's like all of a sudden, we're all going to sit here and each one of us are going to take turns and we're going to come up and God is going to read all of the things that we have done wrong. I would think that we would all be like, oh man, this is going to be really bad. It's going to be really embarrassing. It's going to be humiliating. It's going to be a really bad day. Okay, now fortunately I don't think that's going to happen. Hopefully God has not revealed His plan to do that. Not that He would need to me. So hopefully that isn't going to happen today or next week. But ultimately, when we die, we are going to stand before God. And every act, every deed that we have done is going to be brought to light. All right, now that's not a very pleasant feeling. I get that. It is not a pleasant feeling for me either. We live in this world where we think that we can act one way on the outside and we can inwardly do whatever we want. We can covet, we can hate, we can, as long as it doesn't affect anybody, and we start justifying and coming up with excuses for why it's okay to feel or think certain things. But God knows every thought. He knows every hidden thing in our lives. He has given us a desire to be made right, to find a doctor when we're hurt, to gain more knowledge and understanding when we can't figure something out. That is a normal, natural thing for us as people. And spiritually, we are incomplete without God. And that statement is almost a controversial statement. If I went and was being interviewed by USA Today or NBC, and I made that statement, I would get hate tweets and hate email and hate Facebook posts forever, because nobody wants to hear that they have a need for God, that there's something wrong with them, that they need to be made complete. And yet, when we look at how many people are starving, how many people are murdered, and how much theft and darkness and horror there is in the world, we obviously know that the world needs to be fixed, that humanity needs to be made right. God has offered a pathway for us. And it's kind of a tragedy, because many of us, we're more concerned with what we're going to do tomorrow, or how we're going to spend the weekend, or what vacation we're going to plan for the summer. We're more concerned with those things than how we are spiritually, or with what God's plan and calling for our life is. And because of that, we're so distracted by evil and by darkness and by lies that we just keep going around. It's just like the hamster that's in the little wheel, and he's just running really hard, and he's just going as fast as his little feet can take him, and he just goes nowhere. And I would say, if we were honest, that every person, if I said, well, how many people have ever experienced that in life, every one of us could raise our hands and say, man, I've definitely experienced that time. And maybe even for many of you that you're experiencing that time right now, you just feel like you're just in there, you're going as hard as you can, and it's never enough. I was talking to Janine or somebody at lunch about laundry, about how laundry is never done. It's like this endless cycle of washing clothes, and then they get dirty, and then washing them again. It's on and on and on. And it seems to never end. And many of us live our lives like that in absolute futility. But the truth is that God wants to free us. He wants to take a key and unlock the jail that we're living in and open the door so that we can experience the life that He has for us. A life of peace, a life of freedom, a life of joy. And it's kind of like we're in the jail cell, and we either A, aware that we're in jail, or it's like we're trying to reach outside through the bars and we're trying to, just randomly grab a key like it's going to be out there so that we can let ourselves out. It just doesn't work like that. And so I want to invite you today, whether you are a believer or not, whether you are a leader in the church or not, whether you, no matter what your place is that you feel like you're at spiritually, I want to invite you today to examine very closely the life that you are living, to see if you are living a life that's fulfilling and peaceful and full of joy, or if you are in that rat race, you're like that hamster stuck in the cage that just needs to be let out, to be set free, because God will set you free. He has promised to do that. We have to choose to be freed. Let's pray. God, your words are so much wiser than what I can speak or what any of us can even imagine as we ponder on the vastness of life, the vastness of eternity, of space-time, the universe. We can see the stars, we can see the complexities of living organisms, and we can see that there's a great designer, a great creator who has orchestrated all of it. We can see at times, Lord, that your hand that is offered to us as we're drowning in life, as we're in a pit of despair, as we're frustrated and disappointed with life and where we have gotten. And Lord, though I can do nothing, and though each of us can do nothing, we know that you can do all things. And so I would ask, Lord, very humbly, and as meekly as I could ask, that you would speak to each of us, and that you would allow us the wisdom to reach up and to take your hand as it is offered. That we would stop exchanging all of the truths that you have offered us for lies, and that we would start rejecting the lies. The lies that we have to look a certain way, the lies that we have to have a certain amount of things, the lies that we have to have a certain amount of education, the lies that we have to spend our time a certain way. God, would you just unlock us from all the tentacles of that captivity so that we could live freely and experience a pure life, a life of righteousness, a life of the pursuit of the dreams that you have placed in our hearts. God, I know there are more than one today that just feel discouraged, they're frustrated, they feel like no matter what they do, no matter how hard they try or work, they just can't seem to move forward. God, I pray that you would just show them what the next steps are. God, I thank you for your word. Lord, I claim the promise in this moment that it will never return void, that fruit will come from your words being spoken, and I pray that it would come through us today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.